I'm Michael Shea. Let's see. Oops. There we go. Managing Director of the Dingle Group and wider team. These are strategy and technology consulting organizations working with small, medium-sized businesses, particularly in the decentralized space, but in other areas as well. Working with, giving a bit of a plug to Marcus Sabadello and Danube Tech, who's doing a workshop this afternoon around decentralized identity as well. So if you're around, it's worth catching it. I'm going to talk today about three things, sort of give an update on where decentralized identity is. It's also taking on some new names, whether it's called digital trust. Some of the drivers within the community, or not within the community, but within the market, both from a business and policy side. So this conversation is really going to be more towards business and policy than hardcore technology. My background many years ago, when I had a full head of hair, was in technology, but as you can see, it's gone and I've moved on to different things. Going to cover a few sectors and then sort of wrap up giving a summary here. So, over the last 7 years, I've been involved with the decentralized world and within specifically the identity. I've ended up talking with hundreds of people across the world, from Europe to North America to New Zealand, Korea, all the places. And one of the things that's come clear to me is, what is the value? So what are the core qualities around verifiable credentials and decentralized identifiers that make it important both from a policy side and or a business side? And these are really the four attributes or qualities that have come out. First is provenance, the ability to trace back automatically to where something came from. It's very difficult when you get into the world of business, or where you're dealing not with tens but millions and billions of transactions. Being able to do that automatically is very valuable, and also it's right now very expensive, and a lot of things are excluded. Flexibility, the ability to take from a credential the cryptographic attributes and repackage them in ways. So if any of you are from the UK, to open up a bank account, you have to prove your address. The traditional way is either a phone bill or a utility bill. You must present that whole bill to the bank. Really what they're looking for is an address that says you're not lying. Being able to selectively pull attributes is very valuable. It's even more valuable in the business world, right? It's the same thing. Right today, it's all PDFs or scanned documents. Portability is around the ability of moving it from A to B. I own it, it's mine, whether I'm a natural person, a legal person. It's not stuck in some system somewhere. And the fourth is persistence. Once I have it, I can do something with it for as long as I have it, right? Again, it's not stuck somewhere else. So in looking at what's driving the interest, and there is enormous interest on the policy side and on the business side. Nothing is hit full production, and I'll touch that a little on later. But on the policy side, particularly in the European Union, you're seeing this. Whether it's the EU Digital Identity Wallet, and EIDAS version 2, for those of you who are aware of it. It's the whole new digital ID format that's coming out from the European Union. 2 projects have just kicked off. The Digital Identity Wallet, which is 17 or 20 million funding. Education credentials is another 10 million or 20 million. So the EU is putting enormous amounts of money. Is also tied into circularity, into the digital product passport, which I'll touch on. It's into trade, which I'll touch on. The EU it's really going very wide. And so this is, for my interest, my main interest in this area really is around person identity is important. The opportunity is in legal identity, a legal person, and things. So these are the attributes. You'll see that they're very similar from a policy side to business. Digitalization is a new word that came to me in my reading recently. they are discriminating digitalization from digitization. We've had digitization for 20 years. That's a PDF, right? It's more or less useless, right? It's not trustworthy. You cannot base operations off of it. You don't have that cryptographic assurance. Inclusion, I thought, was a very interesting one. I came across this recently. Inclusion, everybody knows from a person standpoint, right? That's one of the challenges of all the technology. How do you include people? I was talking recently from the CTO of Bhutan. They have populations that live between 5,000 and 6,000 meters. They don't, never mind having no signal, they don't have any technology. They may not even have power, right? But how do you include them in your society? Similar problems in Canada. You have people who live in the far north in very, very remote communities. How do you include those people? So I think everybody understands that element of inclusion. What was new to me was inclusion from a corporate standpoint. In trade, $1.5 trillion a year of trade doesn't happen, they figure, because of the cost of trade finance. A small business cannot afford to pay the fees to a bank to get the loans, get all the infrastructure around that. So these are elements that I think that are interesting, that they're both on the policy side and on the business side. So looking first at trade. There was some conversations, I think, earlier on governance. In trade, there's sort of 3 layers of trust. First is the legal. Having been around this community since I landed in Vienna in 2015, and understanding what, hearing the first word of smart contracts and sitting and listening to guys that were pre-Ethereum release, talking about smart contracts and realizing it. And I know this is, now a little bit of a tired trope, but contracts aren't for when things go well, right? Contracts only exist for when things go in the toilet. If everything went smoothly, a handshake is sufficient, right? It's only when things go terribly wrong that you fall. So you have to have these things tie into legal systems. They have to, otherwise you have no recourse. But then you also have governance. How does the governance work? If somebody issues a letter of credit in a trade situation, how do I know it's real, right? If I have a certificate of authenticity, if I'm manufacturing aircraft parts, it's actually really, really important that certificate of authenticity is real. It could cause an aircraft to crash, right? So these are all the layers that have to exist. And finally is the technology layer. How do I trust the technology? And I think that's really where we're bringing into that is the technology. That's where the decentralized part that is really bringing into that area. So this is a little bit of an eye chart. It looks better up here than it is on here. But it really just to give you a quick overview of how some of the processes on the trust flow purely for an invoice in an international trade situation. This is coming from a recently published report from the International Chamber of Commerce. And it's the use case is a wine merchant, a wine wholesaler in Rotterdam is selling a container full, $750,000 worth of wine to a merchant in Singapore. And all the processes that it has to go through, right? And every one of those invoices, there's a trust, each of those layers of trust have to be managed. And that's really where we're looking at from the decentralized credentials. Some of the projects that are going on right now, some people may be aware of some of the work. Believe it or not, the Department of Homeland Security in the US is a very big supporter of a lot of decentralized technologies. They're actually some of the original funders for the verifiable credentials and the decentralized identifiers. They have a program called the Silicon Valley Innovation Program. It's year 4 of a 5-year program for 2 projects. This one I'm mentioning here because of the trade is around customs and border protection and cross-border trade of steel, oil and gas, farm products, and e-commerce products. If you're not familiar from a startup in a technology of the Silicon Valley Innovation Program, you should be, right? It is an excellent program. It will support, they have very specific calls that they put out. They take a little sidebar here. But as startups, I know that a lot of you guys may be, it's something that's it's a lot of good opportunity. And they fund and they don't take equity. There's another called the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, a company called Sferity in Germany, in Dortmund. has been working with the FDA, and that's going into production. Trace for EU is a project that's just, I guess it's kicking off next week, technically. All the contracts are signed. June 1 is the start off. And this is around building that foundational layer, using credentials and identifiers for the tracking of physical goods through the EU. This one, I apologize, it's a lot of words. But I think what's important here is this is coming from the director from US Customs and Border. What they're looking at is why are they doing this? And he said, my interest is in the policy and business side. And how do you convince people to invest money, right? Technology is great, but if you can't convince either a policy person or a business person to put real money on the table, it's an academic exercise. No slur to academics, right? Our previous panel. But if I'm a trade, I'm moving goods across the border, if I can reduce my goods stuck at the border by 25, 50% of the time, I can turn that into a real business case, right? I can see, is it worth me investing to change my existing processes to go to these new things? That's a really hard part, and it's a lot of times within, particularly in the startup world, we don't consider. I've got this great new tech, but to make someone change, the incremental improvement has to be in the order of 50 to 100%, right? 10% is no good. It's not worth investing. Another one that's recently completed pilot is with British Columbia in Canada. Their energy and mines, and this is around ESG reporting. I think we've all heard of the fraud that goes on with greenwashing, fudging credentials, or fudging audit reports intentionally or otherwise in modeling of sustainability reporting. So the province of British Columbia said they've just recently completed this project or pilot. They were presented it at COP27. They were presented last week at UN CFACT, or 2 weeks ago in CFACT. And these were the areas that they're looking to do, is around the efficiency of reporting, improved trust, privacy preserving. Again, you may or may not consider privacy preserving as important on a corporate side as it is on an individual side. So the validations, the use cases that they were doing is third-party validation. So in this case, Copper Mountain Mine, which is one of the largest mines in British Columbia, was participating. They had a series of pieces where a credential had been issued to them by the province of British Columbia, and they had to share some of those attributes back either to a reporting agency, and so they're be able to take some of these attributes that they received and share them on to other agencies. Likewise, Copper Mountain Mine had IoT devices feeding the data in a credentialized format into a system which was then being audited by PwC, who was then creating the audit report, which went to the ministry. So this is, we might look at this and say, oh, this is the reality. This is the way the world, the business works, and you have to deal with all these. Right now, it's all paper, right? So there's huge opportunity here, but this is where these things stand. I touched on digital product passports. This is a new thing. EU is leading again here on this. The GDPR was the first real shot across the bows for privacy. Digital product passports is another concept that's been introduced by the EU in the last 12, 18 months. And really what it is around being able to track all the elements of a product from its manufacturing till its recycling, and sort of a full circular process. It ties into many things, whether it's the carbon-based asset reporting that is now being required by the EU, circularity, all of these things. So this is there's a Trace for EU is part of this process. EU actually just released another call 10 days ago. I think it's up to 4 or 10 million total in funding. So consortium's there. It's a DigiPass is this the new project. This last one, this is my fourth of my third sector, is mobility. Are anybody here familiar with an organization, the Mobi Alliance? Okay, Mobi Alliance has been around 2018, 2017-ish. They're heavily sponsor-backed. The alliances, if you looked at the members list of the alliance, it's a sort of a who's of everybody in the auto industry. You know, from the tier 1 manufacturers to their tier 1 suppliers, tier 2, and a huge cohort of startups in the decentralized space. So Mobi is a very, if you look at the standards that are available for free, or partial standards that are available for free, because you can't get the full standard unless you're a member, they're introducing concepts called like a VID instead of a VIN. If you people are familiar with what a VIN is a vehicle identification number. It's usually stamped in a metal plate at the bottom of your left side of your windscreen. Is the one you can see. You can't see where it's stamped on the engine block and other parts of the car as well. They're now talking about a VID, and it's a combination of a decentralized identifier and a vehicle identifier coming together. So they're looking at it. But I think what's important for people to realize also is that business moves in very different timelines than consumer, right? You don't move something into production unless it really works, if it's going to potentially crater your revenue sources. So 3 to 5 years is a normal timeline, right, for that. So Mobi is doing an awful lot of stuff. If you don't know it, take a look at dlt.mobi. There's a lot of very interesting stuff going on there. This last one is Move ID, which is part of the Gaia X world. What they're looking at is the vehicle in the smart city connected to everything. So it's vehicle to everything communication. And you know, you see this little laser dot there, the vehicle here, and it's connecting to whether it's to a service station, tolls, power for your electrical vehicle, gates, you know, all of this stuff. This is where people are looking at now. This is really more of a research project. It's not, you know, near term to be in anybody's car or in anybody's city, but this is where they're looking at the ability to exchange that data, exchange the identity information automatically, right? If you're familiar with the decentralized identity world, it's very person-centric. If you look within most of the presentations, they talk about scanning a QR code, selecting the attributes you want to exchange. That doesn't work when you're a car driving down the street, right? You're not having QR codes flash up everywhere. So there's some invention that has to happen. How do you do that when you have the device-to-device communication? How does that information get exchanged? Do you need all the information that exists in the dynamic world of a smartphone and a person, or can you constrict things? So this is some of the things where, you know, of the projects that are going on. Like I said, there's one of the things in the community has been, who can I point to? Who's first, right? Who is first to really put something truly into production? And by production, I mean millions or tens of millions of transactions. As far as I know, there's probably three projects that are closest. There's a project called TrueAge in the US that's sponsored by the National Association of Convenience Stores. So it's an industry-led thing, and it's around buying age-restricted products. So that's people. They have 154,000 convenience stores in the United States. You know, and that's Walmart, Target as well, or is a convenience store there, right? The U.S. has a digital green card that's in year 4 of a 5-year program, and U.S. Customs. Those are probably the three that I think are the closest to going to full production. So sort of come back, in my last 1 second here. It's these attributes that gets people's attention, excuse me, that gets the attention. The ability to automatically trace to provenance, so I know where it came from. I know the governance model. I know who issued this and why they are legitimate to issue it. It's not, you know, I didn't just go to Joe's Bar and Grill and get a driver's license, right? All of this stuff is very important, and this is really where I see the changes coming. Identity, when you say the word identity, we automatically think about people, right? And it is a very important part of people. But identity extends from a market potential, from a business potential, Identity, corporate identity, and identity of things, supply chains, mobility, trade goods, is probably 10 times the size of the market of identity for people. I'll leave that. I'll wrap it up. Thank you.